Hey, this is Mark for SG1 Sports. Please join me at my YouTube channel, MarkRogersTV, for the most insightful breakdown of college football on the internet. Right now, we are breaking down the top 10 dark horses for 2018. Dark horse, what does that mean? Well, think Michigan State last year. Sparty bounced back from 3-9 in 2016 all the way to 10-3 in the top 15 finish. Or how about Washington the previous season? 6 losses, and then all the way to the college football playoff and a Pac-12 championship. I think Auburn's the very best example. This was remarkable. In 2012, the Tigers went 0-8 in the SEC, 3-9 overall, and then went all the way in Gus Malzahn's first season to a BCS championship game and within 7 seconds of winning the national title. All right, the top 10 for 2018 starts with Maryland. Yes, the Terps. 4-8 last season after a 3-1 start. DJ Durkin, though, is building a solid foundation at College Park. His 2 recruiting classes rank 4th and 5th in the Big Ten, number 18 and 28 in the nation. That ranks with the likes of NC State, Louisville, Wisconsin, Michigan State, and TCU. That good. Okay, the quarterback situation was a mess last year. They ran through 5 quarterbacks. Tyrell Pigrome won the job. He threw 2 touchdowns in the opener against Texas, and then he tore his ACL. Okay, his replacement, Kasim Hill, finished off Texas, and then a couple weeks later, he tore his ACL against Central Florida. One of the great names in college football, Max Bortenschlager. He finished the season, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Those 3 guys will battle it out in August for the starting quarterback spot. The best position on this team is running back, Ty Johnson. He ran for 1,000 yards 2 years ago, 875 last year, but he's joined in a crowded backfield, and we'll give you one name to look out for. He is Booger McFarland's son, Anthony. He was a 4-star recruit 2 years ago and a redshirt freshman coming into this season. Look out for him. And also a plethora of wide receivers trying to replace DJ Moore, who moves on to the NFL with his 80 receptions. All right, DJ Durkin made his name on defense. He built that side of the football at Stanford, Florida, and Michigan. And this unit is awful. They finished 120th in the nation last year in giving up 37 points per game. They have to get better. Well, they've got 2 of their top 3 tacklers back in Isaiah Davis and Antoine Brooks, and they've got Byron Cowart on the team now. Do you remember that name? He was the number 1 rated defensive player coming out of high school in 2015, went to Auburn, had a spotty career, and now he's a grad transfer showing up at Maryland. This team only made 8 of 15 field goals. In close games, they need to do better than that, and against this schedule. Brutal against the Big Ten Eastern Division, of course, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State. But they get a decent touch, a light touch in the Western Division. They miss Wisconsin. They only have to face Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. The non-conference, you've got Bowling Green and Temple, and of course the rematch against Texas at FedEx Field on September 1st. Maryland at number 10 in our dark horse list. Boston College checks in at number 9 following a 7-6 campaign and a loss to Iowa in the Pinstripe Bowl. A.J. Dillon, a stud, ran for 1,589 yards and 14 touchdowns as a freshman and lugged it 300 times. This is possibly Steve Adazio's most talented team at Boston College in 6 years there. They have to figure it out at quarterback, though. Anthony Brown is probably the starter after throwing 11 touchdowns as a freshman, but he's going to be challenged by E.J. Perry. Dillon's so good that former starter John Hilleman has transferred to Rutgers, but that means Dillon has no experienced backup, so he's got to stay healthy. The receivers are the best since Adazio came to Boston College as well. Kobe White caught 34 passes. You've got Jeff Smith with 25 receptions. But the best receiver out of the bunch is the tight end, Tommy Sweeney, with 36 catches and 4 touchdowns in the offensive line. Very experienced. Okay, the defense at Boston College, despite losing a ton of games in 2014, 15, and 16, was one of the best in college football, ranking every season in the top 10 in the nation in points against and yards allowed. They slipped last season, despite the great play, of course, of the All-America Harold Landry. He was hobbled with injuries. They finished 69th in total defense, number 36 in points allowed. Zach Allen is the next star. He lined up opposite the All-America Landry at the other DN position. 100 tackles, 15.5 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks. They also have Connor Strachan, their top tackler in 2016, who was out all of 2017. He comes back as well. And the secondary is led by Lucas Dennis, who intercepted 7 passes. All right, the schedule. You get no break, Boston College. You got to face the 2 best teams in the Coastal Division of the ACC in Miami and Virginia Tech. And, of course, the Atlantic Division is one of the best in college football. All right, out of conference, Purdue's going to be an interesting game on the road, and also UMass, Holy Cross, and Temple. We've got Boston College as the 9th dark horse in our list of 10. And at number 8 in our countdown, we've got Mississippi State. The Bulldogs coming off a 9-4 campaign. Of course, they lost their head coach, Dan Mullen, to Florida. They bring in Joe Moorhead from Penn State, who has no head coaching experience at the Power 5 level, but he will be calling the plays as he did at Penn State. And he's got one of the best quarterbacks in the nation in Nick Fitzgerald, coming off that horrendous ankle injury against Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl, but Fitzgerald should be good to go in 2018 after 2,300 yards rushing and 30 touchdowns on the ground the last 2 seasons, but he needs to be more accurate in Moorhead's offense. He likes to throw the ball downfield, and he loves an efficient passing game, and Fitzgerald only completed 55% of his tosses the last 2 years. Mississippi State should be better at wide receiver. That's been a downfall of this team in recent years, but they pick up the number 1 junior college wide receiver in Stephen Guidry and some prized recruits as well. Eris Williams ran for 1,100 yards last season, but he may become a pass catcher. Only caught 11 last year from Mississippi State, but Moorhead may be turning him into a Saquon Barkley. Saquon caught 54 for Penn State last year. The offensive line looking great with 4 offensive linemen coming back for an offense that rated 45th in the nation in total yardage. The defense was much better and should continue to be near the elite of college football. The Bulldogs, not many people know it, they were number 10 in the nation in total defense last year. All right, despite having another new defensive coordinator last year and another new one this year in Bob Shoop, who did his most recent work at Tennessee and Penn State. Mississippi State has its top 2 tacklers back in Mark McLaurin and in Jonathan Abram. They also have their 2 biggest disruptors in the backfield, Jeffrey Simmons and Montez Sweat. Sweat had 15 tackles for loss, and he had 10 sacks. Simmons tore it up as well. 12 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. These 2 are 2 of the best in the nation. The SEC Western Division, of course, is loaded, so Mississippi State has to deal with that, but they've got a fairly light touch in the Eastern Division with Kentucky and Florida. The non-conference lines up with Stephen F. Austin, Louisiana, and Louisiana Tech. I think the Bulldogs can handle that, but they do have an interesting matchup on the road at Kansas State. Mississippi State, our 8th biggest dark horse for 2018. Checking in at number 7 in our countdown is Nebraska for basically one reason. Scott Frost. Yes, he's that good. He took over Central Florida at 0-12, and 2 years later, they, of course, went 13-0. All right, he knows how to get through to kids. He knows offensive football better than just about anyone in college football, and he knows how to build a program, and he does it quickly, obviously. All right, he also has some better talent than you would expect at Nebraska. Yeah, the Huskers were awful last season at 4-8, but consider Mike Riley's 4 recruiting classes, and what has built this roster is the 4th, 5th, 5th, and 4th rated recruiting classes in the Big Ten, all ranked in the top 30 in the country. So he's got some talent to work with, and I'm going to trust that Scott Frost knows what to do with it. All right, he's got a quarterback battle to settle with sophomore Patrick O'Brien, who played a little bit last year, redshirt freshman Tristan Gebbia, and then you also have Adrian Martinez, the early enrollee and fan favorite. All right, the quarterback position is up in the air, but the wide receivers are 2 of the best in the Big Ten. In J.D. Spielman, coming off a freshman campaign with 55 catches, and Stanley Morgan, 61 catches and 10 touchdowns. The running backs could be good or not so good. It all depends on Trey Bryant. He ran for 192 and 107 yards in his first 2 games last year. Then he got hurt badly. He even missed spring practice this year. Divine Ezigbo's a workmanlike back, but not very good at 3.8 yards per carry. So enter the #1 JUCO running back in the nation in Greg Bell. Expect big things out of him in Nebraska. All right, the offensive line has been horrible in recent years, but Scott Frost will work his magic there as well. All right, the defense only sacked the quarterback 14 times. That was worse than the Big Ten. They do have the entire 2-deep back along the defensive front. And they do have 2 really good linebackers in Dedrick Young, who had 80 stops last year, and Ben Still with 9.5 tackles for loss. The secondary brings back all the cornerbacks, excluding Chris Jones, and Aaron Williams is the leader of the back 7 on defense at safety. All right, unfortunately for a dark horse pick, the schedule really doesn't line up. Yes, the Big Ten Western Division isn't great, but they've got to deal with Wisconsin. And then they've got the toughest draw out of anybody in facing the East. Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State. The non-conference pretty easy with Akron, Colorado, and Troy. That game against the Buffs is going to be interesting, of course, renewing an old rivalry against the Big 12. At number 7 of our dark horses is Nebraska. Can Chip Kelly make that much of a difference at UCLA in year number 1? The Bruins check in at number 6 on our top 10 dark horse list. The recruiting at UCLA has been good. He's got a roster theoretically full of talent. 4th, 2nd, and 2nd in the last 4 years under Jim Mora. That's the roster. Theoretically, it's as good as the roster he had in taking Oregon to all those top 5 finishes. Their recruiting classes in his last 4 years, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 2nd in the Pac-12. All right, he definitely has no Marcus Mariota on this roster. He's got a bunch of quarterbacks. Some do some things well, others do other things well. Wilton Speight threw 18 touchdowns for Michigan in leading them to a top 10 finish 2 years ago, but doesn't necessarily fit the Chip Kelly scheme. Devin Monster started the last 2 games last year and did some good things, but he's not a very talented thrower downfield. Prize recruit, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He's the guy that everyone wants to see at UCLA. He was the 2nd-rated dual-threat quarterback in all of college football. The running backs are decent. Bolo Olarunfemi and Soso Jamabo are good backs, but the offensive line didn't let them break any big plays. That has to change in this Chip Kelly offense. Your top wide receiver is Theo Howard. He caught 53 balls last year. And tight end Caleb Wilson with 38 receptions. Okay, to make it all work, the offensive line has got to get better. It's been deplorable the last few seasons. All right, the defense isn't bad, and definitely based on the recruiting rankings that I just listed off, has some talent under the radar. Breakout players possibly include Jalen Phillips, 7 tackles for loss last season, Kelsian Lucier-Smith with 53 tackles, and Darnay Holmes, a stud who picked off 3 passes last year. The place kicker, J.J. Molson's back. He's one of the best in the nation at 17 of 21, but there is definitely no DeAnthony Thomas on this roster in special teams. UCLA ranked in the bottom 10 in the nation in both punt and kickoff return yardage. Okay, the schedule's pretty tough. Fresno State made it to the Mountain West Championship game last year. UCLA has a date on the road at Oklahoma, and they've got to face the 2 best teams in the Pac-12 North Division in Stanford and Washington. But Chip Kelly and some decent recruiting classes mean that UCLA is a dark horse, number 6 in our rankings. All right, it's time to get the group of 5 involved in this countdown of top 10 dark horses for 2018, and why not go to Boise State, the original giant killer out of the group of 5. And Boise State is back, 11-3 last season and 9-1 down the stretch. They've got a 4-year starting quarterback in Brett Rippon, who's got almost 10,000 passing yards. Okay, they've got to replace one of the best wide receivers in college football in Cedric Wilson, 1,500 yards receiving last year, but they've got A.J. Richardson, Sean Monster, they're 2 of the best coming back for the Broncos. And junior running back Alexander Madison with over 1,000 yards rushing. He's back for the Broncos as well. On defense, this is probably the best defense in the group of 5, despite losing the player of the year in the Mountain West Conference, Leighton Vander Esch. Boise State, get this, they bring back 10 of their top 11 tacklers, 12 of 15 interceptions from 2017, and also 30 of their 34 sacks, including Curtis Weaver, who had 11 quarterback sacks, and their senior safety, one of the best in all of college football, in Tyler Horton. Their place kicker, he comes back for Boise State, Hayden Hogarth, who hit on 18 of 23 as a junior. All right, the big non-conference game is at Oklahoma State. So if the Broncos can get by that game and a Week 5 matchup against San Diego State, there is definitely going to be college football playoff talk surrounding the Boise State Broncos, our number 5 team in our countdown of dark horses for 2018. We're down to number 4 in our countdown of top dark horses with the Florida Gators. 4-7 last year. How much can they improve in 2018? Well, they've got a new head coach in Dan Mullen. He won in Starkville. He can definitely win in Gainesville with that Florida talent. Eventually. What about 2018? Well, Georgia's too good to bring down, but maybe Florida can make it all the way back to number 2 in the division. Florida's last 2 productive quarterbacks are now playing at West Virginia and AA baseball in Binghamton. And yes, Dan Mullen did work with Tim Tebow. Now he's got Felipe Franks to develop. After 55% completion percentage in 2017, 9 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. This Florida offense was pretty deplorable. Kyle Trask is going to have something to say in August about possibly wrestling away the starting job away from Franks. But the running game should be better with Jordan Scarlett back. He ran for 900-plus yards 2 seasons ago, but was suspended in 2017. LaMichael Pirine and Malik Davis both ran for over 500 yards and 10 total touchdowns last season for an offense that ranked, get this, 108th in scoring last year, 13th in the SEC in total offense, last in first downs, 13th in third down conversions. Ole Miss transfer Van Jefferson, if he is cleared by the NCAA, he's already been cleared by the SEC, could make this the best trio of wide receivers at Florida going back a decade with Tyree Cleveland and Kadarius Toney as well. All right, now to the defense, which has been elite in recent years, but it's slipped the past couple. Taven Bryan's gone, Duke Dawson off to the NFL as early draftees. David Aristo comes back with 110 tackles. Chauncey Gardner's an all-SEC safety. But the real wild card here, I think, is C.C. Jefferson, a very good player with 13 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. But he could become an elite player at D-end, and Florida needs disruptors on defense. Defensive coordinator Todd Grantham is definitely going to let it go. He will provide a more aggressive scheme for the Florida defense in 2018. All right, the schedule for the Gators, of course, includes Georgia and the rest of the Eastern Division and 2 difficult games out of the West in LSU and the Dan Mullen tour stop in Starkville against Mississippi State. That should be an interesting one to watch. All right, out of conference, you've got Colorado State, Charleston Southern, and Idaho, and of course, the rivalry game against Florida State in Tallahassee this year for the Gators. College football's most recited score in 2017, Iowa 55, Ohio State 24. If the Hawkeyes can bottle that performance, they will be the dark horse winner for 2018. But the losses are massive. Josie Jewell, one of the most productive hitting machines in college football, gone. The nation's interception leader, Josh Jackson, he's gone as well. And their leader along the offensive line, center James Daniels, takes his services to the NFL. And the most dynamic back in the Big Ten Western Division, Akram Wadley. He's gone as well, as his backup is gone from Kinnick Stadium. All right, the Hawkeyes bring back one of their best quarterbacks in recent years, Nathan Stanley. Needs to improve on the completion percentage at 56%, but the TD to interception ratio exceptional at 26-6. His favorite target is Noah Fant, one of the best tight ends in the nation, who caught 11 scores last year. And senior Nick Easley's back, one of the most reliable players in college football, out of the slot with 55 catches. All right, Torrin Young and Ivory Kelly-Martin will replace Wadley at running back. They contributed with 377 rushing yards last season. All right, the defense may boast one of the best pass rushes in college football. You've got senior A.J. Epinesa, Parker Hess, Anthony Nelson, these guys were disruptors last year. They totaled 16 sacks, and that total should spike in 2018. The linebackers, like we say, with Josie Jewell gone, all of them are gone. They bring back special teams players to play linebacker, so that's a huge question mark. But in the secondary, you've got junior safety Amani Hooker, one of the best in the business and in the Big Ten. Place kicker Miguel Racinos hit on 11 of 13 field goals, so the Hawkeyes in good shape there. All right, the schedule sets up nicely. Iowa misses Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State out of the Eastern Division. They also have Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Northwestern at home. And get this, in the non-conference, Iowa doesn't leave home, and they take on Northern Iowa, Northern Illinois, and Iowa State. Big personnel losses, but big advantages for the Hawkeyes. They check in at number 3 on our list of top 10 dark horses for 2018. The number 2 team in our countdown, Texas, 8-5 last season, their first winning season in 5 seasons. Tom Herman's first, of course, and Texas brought Tom Herman back to Texas to make Texas, Texas again, and he almost did it in year 1. They only lost to USC and Oklahoma State by 1 score in overtime and by 5 points to Oklahoma, one of the top 3 teams in the nation. All right. The offense took a step back last year, which was kind of difficult since Charlie Strong's offenses were never strong. But Tom Herman should get it together here in year 2. He's got Sam Ehlinger at quarterback, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's the runner. And he's got Shane Buechele, more of the polished pocket passer who threw 7 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. But Ehlinger most likely will win the job. The offensive line gets a big boost with Herb Hand coming in from Auburn to coach him up. And also you got Calvin Anderson, a grad transfer from Rice. The offensive line was the biggest issue last year, but should be much better in 2018. This team has a slew of intriguing skill position players, including Daniel Young, Tennell Carter at running back, and also the nation's number 1 player out of Texas at that position in Keontae Ingram. 2 very productive wide receivers come back in Colin Johnson and Lil Jordan Humphrey. They caught 81 passes between them. And now let's look at the defense, which was one of the best in the Big 12 with TCU, giving up just 21 points per game. They had the best third down conversion rate in the conference, and they took the ball away and scored 7 touchdowns in 2017. But they lose some awesome talent in Malik Jefferson, Poona Ford, Holton Hill, and Deshaun Elliott. But Texas is still primed to be a tremendous defensive team. They signed 5 of the top defensive backs in the nation, and then they bring back a lot of productive players. They've got Brecklin Hager, who had 9 tackles for loss, Charles Amenahue with 7 tackles for loss and 4 sacks, Malcolm Roach with 33 tackles, and Gary Johnson with 57 stops. Texas's schedule, pretty tough. They've got the return date with Maryland, September 1st, trying to get revenge against the Terps, and then they also take on USC, trying to get revenge from the overtime loss, as this time they've got USC at home, and then, of course, they take on the entire Big 12 conference in all 9 conference games. Texas, are they back? Well, they're number 2 on our list of top 10 dark horses for 2018. All right, now to the number 1 team in our countdown of top 10 dark horses for 2018. Yes, it's a program that went 60-8 from 2010 to 2014, played in a national championship game that season, but it's only gone 20-18 since. So is Oregon now mediocre, or is it time for a bounce back? Well, Willie Taggart is bounced all the way to Florida State, so enter Mario Cristobal, who gets his first Power 5 head coaching gig. Well, he's got one of the best talents at quarterback in the country in Justin Herbert, projected to be a top 5 NFL draft pick in 2019. The offensive line is pretty good, coming back with 3 starters, plus Dallas Warmack, a transfer from Alabama. All right, the offense loses its top rusher in the history of the school in Royce Freeman, but brings back a really good back in Tony Brooks James, who carried the ball for 500 yards last season. They also pick up an under-the-radar transfer from Wake Forest, Jabari Hines at wide receiver. He caught 53 passes last year, And Herbert's favorite target is back in tight end Jacob Breland and his 5 touchdown catches. All right, the defense could be really good if they stay healthy because depth is an issue, but there's some serious standouts on this defense led by defensive coordinator Jim Leavitt. This guy knows what he's doing. He comes in from Colorado, the former South Florida head coach, and the defensive metrics for Oregon went from deplorable to really good last year. He brings back Jalen Jelks. He had 15.5 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Also, linebacker Trey Dye, who bypassed the NFL draft and comes back after 4 sacks and 14 tackles for loss. All right. This team is set to explode potentially. They've got to deal with the 2 favorites in the Pac-12 North Division, of course, in Washington and Stanford. They don't have to play USC this year. They've got some teams in the Pac-12 South that are decent on the schedule, and they also got nobody in the non-conference. They've got Bowling Green, Portland State, and San Jose State. Think back to Washington's run to the college football playoff 2 years ago when they played nobody non-conference. So they don't have that challenge to deal with. Oregon, 7-6 last year. Are they the dark horse in college football in 2018? Well, that's our top 10 list. Would love to hear from you. And also check out my YouTube channel, Mark Rogers TV, for the very best in college football analysis.